Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
Don't let her handle the money, she's not great with it. Jake tossed that line out like it was a leftover slice of cold pizza, a joke nobody really wanted, but everyone pretended to enjoy. He grinned, flashing those same teeth he'd used to charm his way out of consequences since high school. I saw the corners of mouths twitching around the table, small awkward chuckles bubbling up like they didn't know whether to laugh or wait for me to shoot back. And they were right to hesitate, because this time, I didn't let it slide. I leaned back, slowly, letting my fingers trace the rim of my glass, letting that silence stretch until it became just uncomfortable enough to make even the wallpaper sweat. Then, with the calmest voice I could find, I smiled. Not a real smile, not the kind I save for my daughter or a good Pinot Noir, the kind of smile that says, "You're going to regret saying that out loud." I looked Jake dead in the eyes and said, "Interesting. Considering I own the house you're sitting in." And, just like that, every chuckle died midair. The tension landed so hard it might as well have broken a floorboard. You could hear someone's ice cube shift in their glass. Jake's smile faltered first, like a man who just realized the gun on the wall was loaded. Mom looked at her hands, confused like she'd missed a memo, and Dad, true to form, stayed frozen in his seat like someone had just pressed pause on his face. Marissa, Jake's wife, cleared her throat and reached for a pretzel, the way she always did when she was trying not to be in the room. And Maddie, my 15-year-old daughter, gave me a look that said, "About time, Mom." I hadn't planned to say it. God knows I've let a million comments like that go unchallenged. That's the role I've always played, isn't it? The quietly dependable one. The one who doesn't like attention. The one who keeps things together. The one who gets asked to bring the dessert but never gets asked how she's really doing. But that night, something in me snapped. And maybe it wasn't just Jake's tone or the way they all still laughed when the joke was at my expense. Maybe it was the fact that this goddamn house they all sat in comfortably, feet on rugs I paid for, walls I painted, a kitchen I remodeled with my own bonus check, had become their playground. And they didn't even know they were standing on ground I bled to lay down. Jake tried to laugh it off, of course. "Okay, wow, Emmy, didn't know we were getting financial statements with our pizza rolls," he said, doing that thing where he stretched out his words like he was still 12 and charming his way out of grounding. I just stared at him. "You're serious?" he asked. "You own this place?" I nodded. "Yes. My name. On the deed. On the mortgage. Every bill. Every tax. Every repair. Mine." Silence again. Even Maddie stopped chewing. Jake blinked like he was buffering. "I thought you said we bought this house together," he said finally, and when he said it, there was this raw confusion in his voice, like he genuinely believed his own version of the story. That's what got me. Not the joke. Not the disrespect. But the fact that in his head, he really thought we'd done this together. He remembered the help, but not the cost. "No," I said calmly. "You said that. I let you." And then I stood up, walked out of the living room, and went into the kitchen. I opened the drawer near the fridge, the one that holds all the stuff you think you'll need one day but never do. Batteries, Sharpies, rubber bands, keys that unlock forgotten locks. And there it was, wedged in the back behind a pack of expired coupons. An old manila envelope, sealed but creased with age. On the front, in my handwriting, "For when you forget." I hadn't touched it in years. But I always knew exactly where it was. Because deep down, I knew this moment would come. Families are predictable like that. You give enough. You bite your tongue enough. You carry enough of other people's weight on your back. Eventually, someone forgets how heavy that load was. Or worse, they pretend they carried it with you. I brought the envelope back into the room, didn't say a word, just placed it gently on the coffee table in front of Jake. He looked at it like it might explode. "What's that?" he asked. "A reminder," I said. "For you. And maybe for the rest of you too." Marissa frowned. "Emily, are you okay?" I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't lie. "No. I'm tired." I'm done letting everyone rewrite history while I pay the invoice. Dad shifted in his seat, like he wanted to say something but decided against it. Mom looked like she wanted to cry, but I'd seen those tears before, and I wasn't in the mood to mop up guilt with forgiveness tonight. Jake finally reached for the envelope. His fingers hesitated. What's in it? I smiled again. Everything you forgot. Everything I didn't. And I didn't say another word for the rest of the night. What do you think Jake will find when he opens the envelope, and how do you think he'll spin it this time? I didn't sleep that night, not really anyway, not the kind of sleep that settles into your bones and tells your mind to shut up for once, just the kind where you lay there with your eyes closed and your heart chewing on the past like a stale piece of bread. Maddie had gone to bed without asking questions, which scared me more than if she'd asked 10. When your kid doesn't push, it's usually because they already know the answer, or at least the version of it they're ready to handle. I sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were off, the envelope lying right in the center like some kind of ghost, not from the past exactly, but from a future I'd been trying to avoid. That envelope. I remember writing those 4 words like I was carving them into the skin of a life I didn't want anymore. For when you forget. I knew back then that I'd need them someday. That Jake would forget, or pretend to. That Mom would rewrite the story in her soft, apologetic voice. That Dad would shrug and mumble something about not getting involved. So I wrote it all down, and I kept the papers, the wire transfer receipts, the co-signed loan forms, the escrow documents, the back and forth with the IRS rep named Karen who smelled like cinnamon gum and pity. I kept every single one. Not because I needed revenge. Not back then. But because I needed proof. Because sometimes surviving a lie is easier than convincing people it ever happened in the first place. It all started 8 years ago, the same year Maddie turned 7 and Jake's life fell apart for what must have been the 4th or 5th time. He called me out of nowhere, which in itself was a warning sign. Jake never calls unless he needs something or he's drunk enough to forget he owes you. This time, he was both. He sounded like someone pretending to be calm. He told me it was just a hiccup, a minor issue with taxes and a bad roommate situation, and a weird landlord who was probably racist. I've heard that voice enough times to recognize the desperation underneath. He was behind on rent, behind on car payments, and surprise, hadn't filed taxes in 3 years. The IRS had finally noticed, and now his paycheck was about to get garnished, and the apartment complex was threatening eviction. And oh, by the way, he found a house that he totally could get if someone just helped co-sign. It wasn't a request. Not really. It was more like an expectation dressed up as humility. And like an idiot or a sister, I guess, I said I'd help. I looked at the listing, I ran the numbers, and I told him flat out he couldn't afford it. He got defensive. Said I was always like this. Said I didn't believe in him. Said I loved Maddie more than I loved my own brother. And that's when he started crying. Real tears, ugly ones. Jake's the kind of guy who only cries when there's a calculator involved. And in that moment, I thought maybe this was his rock bottom. I thought if I helped him now, he'd finally grow up. Back then, I pulled out 15 grand from my 401k, which is like, what, half a year's worth of rent? Give or take. I mean, I don't remember exactly, but that was the amount that made me hesitate, that made me sit on the edge of my bed at 1 a.m, wondering what the hell I was doing risking my own retirement, because my brother couldn't keep a job longer than 6 months. But I did it anyway. I co-signed. I wired the down payment. I used my credit score, my income history, my name, everything. The mortgage was mine. Jake moved in, changed the locks without asking, threw a housewarming party I wasn't even invited to. And Mom called me 2 weeks later, beaming, saying how proud she was of Jake for finally getting his life together. She said I should have come to the party. I said I had work. I didn't. I just couldn't watch everyone toast to his comeback story while I sat there, the invisible scaffold holding up his second chance. And here's the part that still burns if I think too hard about it. He believed it was his house. I think he still does. Maybe because I let him. Maybe because it was easier than correcting everyone at every turn. I remember the first Thanksgiving after he moved in. Marissa gave me a glass of wine and told me how grateful she was for me, said I was the cool sister-in-law who never judges. And then she laughed and said, I mean, obviously, Jake's the breadwinner now. I smiled. I didn't correct her. I told myself it didn't matter who got credit, as long as he stayed afloat. But it does matter. Credit matters. Especially when you've spent your whole life being the dependable one who gets forgotten. So last night, when I pulled out that envelope and laid it on the table, it wasn't just to prove a point. It was to mark the end of something. The end of me swallowing it all. Maddie was the first one up this morning. She came into the kitchen wearing that oversized hoodie she stole from my closet, hair a mess, eyes sharp like always. She saw the envelope and picked it up like it was radioactive. What's this? She asked. I sipped my coffee, still warm, still bitter. Proof, I said. She opened it slowly, carefully, like she knew it held something bigger than paper. Her eyes scanned the pages, widening with every line. This is everything, she said. Every single thing. Yeah, I said. Every single thing. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she looked up at me and said, Are you gonna show them this? And I looked her in the face, my daughter who saw through everything, and said, No, sweetheart. I already did. Now it's just a matter of who reads it first, and who pretends they never saw it. The evening dragged on like wet laundry on a clothesline, hanging there in plain view, heavy with the stink of things left unsaid. After I dropped the envelope on the table and left it sitting like a live grenade nobody wanted to touch, we sort of drifted. Game night didn't officially end, but nobody reached for another card or dice or whatever box was next. Jake got weirdly quiet, and I didn't push, because the truth has this way of echoing after you speak it, and his silence was louder than anything I could have said. Dad took his usual place by the window, sipping bourbon with the patience of a man who's spent decades watching drama unfold around him without ever stepping into the frame. Mom started picking at the crumbs on the counter, pretending to clean something that didn't need cleaning, her shoulders drawn up like a kid trying to disappear during a scolding. Marissa, decided it was her time to smooth things over, the way she always does when discomfort leaks into her curated reality. She gave me this bright little smile like she hadn't just watched me set fire to the entire family illusion. So she chirped, clapping her hands once. Too loud for the moment. Are we gonna play another round or what? No one answered her. Jake looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe a joke to take the edge off. Maybe another swing at the usual banter. But he didn't. And I didn't help him out. Not this time. I just sat there, still calm, still quiet, with the kind of stillness you only earn from years of being the one everyone leans on, until one day you stop holding them up. That's when Mom, sweet Carol, queen of denial and long sighs, looked over at Jake and gave him a soft smile, the kind that made me want to scream. You've always had such ambition, she said, like it was some kind of compliment, like ambition had ever built anything in Jake's life without someone else laying the foundation. Remember how you used to talk about flipping houses? She added, her voice dreamy, like we were flipping through old photo albums instead of sitting in a room full of shattered truths. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because Maddie, my Maddie, quiet when it matters, sharp when it counts, tilted her head and said, Perfectly casual, you mean when he almost lost the house Mom bought? And that right there was the sound of a damn record scratch. Jake shot her a look, the kind that says stay out of grown folks' business, but Maddie didn't flinch. She looked straight at him, eyes steady, chin up the way I wish I had done when I was her age and being told to smile more while my brother got praised for existing. Mom blinked like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard, and her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Dad finally shifted in his chair, clearing his throat like he might actually say something, but surprise, he didn't. He just swirled his drink and stared at the wall. Carol found her voice first. That's not fair, she said, her tone sharp with sudden maternal defense. You make it sound like Jake did something wrong. Emily offered to help, no one forced her. Her eyes flashed to me, and I saw it then, the thing I always knew was there but had never fully admitted to myself. She wasn't blind to the sacrifices, she just never thought they counted. Because in her mind, helping was my role. That's what I was supposed to do. I set my glass down with the kind of care you only use when you're trying very hard not to throw it. I didn't offer, I said. He asked. He begged. And I helped because I didn't want him living out of his car. That's not a choice, Carol. That's a trap wrapped in guilt and responsibility. Mom's eyes went glassy, the way they always did when the narrative slipped out of her control. You're holding a grudge, she said quietly, like that was worse than what Jake had done. And just like that, I was 13 again, standing in the kitchen with a broken lamp at my feet and Jake behind me, hiding the slingshot, while Mom scolded me for always being too rough. I took the blame that day. I took it every day. Every damn time something got broken, misused, stolen, or lied about, it somehow landed in my lap. I was the calm one, the strong one, the one who could handle being misunderstood. And I did for years. Until I couldn't anymore. I turned to Jake then. He hadn't moved much since Maddie spoke, still frozen in that particular kind of shame that only shows up when you're being held accountable in public. I reached into the tote bag I'd brought and pulled out another folder. This one was newer. Clean, organized, tabbed. I walked it across the room and dropped it in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, his voice already defensive, like a kid who knows detention is coming. "It's a copy of the refinance papers you signed last year," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The ones that kept you from defaulting again. The ones I signed alone, without adding you to the title. You're not on the deed, Jake. You never were. You're welcome." Jake opened his mouth, but whatever comeback he was planning died on his tongue. I turned back to the kitchen, picked up my drink again, and this time, I did sip. Slowly, letting it burn. Credit and blame, funny how often they land in the wrong hands. And sometimes, you've got to grab them both back, even if your hands shake while you do it. The house was quieter than it had any right to be, considering how loud the air had been just an hour earlier. There's a different kind of silence that comes after you throw truth on the table like a lit match. It's not peace, it's not relief. It's just the stunned kind of hush people fall into when their illusions start collapsing, and they don't yet know whether to mourn or rebuild. I watched my mother try to piece the evening back together with polite phrases and desperate glances, like someone trying to staple a torn wedding dress minutes before the ceremony. But the fabric was already ruined, and no one at that table was pretending it still fit. I'd barely sat down again when I felt the old ache rise in my chest, not the kind that makes you cry, but the slow, grinding kind that comes from swallowing things too many times, blame, hurt, resentment, all those bitter little pills. And something in me, probably the same part that stayed silent for 30 years, decided this was the night it finally dies. I looked at my father, who had spent most of the evening observing from his corner, like a quiet guard at a royal funeral, present but disengaged. There had been moments over the years when I thought he might speak up, when I hoped for it, school plays when Jake got the applause for showing up late, hospital visits where I was the one keeping track of prescriptions while everyone asked Jake how he was holding up. Even family dinners where I bit my tongue raw while Mom talked about how hard life had been on my brother. Dad always stayed quiet. Always. So I looked straight at him and asked the question I'd buried so deep I almost didn't recognize the sound of it. "Why didn't you ever stand up for me?" His eyes met mine, slowly. He didn't flinch, didn't look away, just blinked and said with this maddening, level calmness, "I didn't think you needed it." I sat there staring at him, stunned by the simplicity of it. Not a justification. Not an apology. Just a single sentence that explained everything and excused nothing. He didn't think I needed it. Because I was strong. Because I kept going. Because I never cried when Jake broke my toys and got away with it. Because I was the one who said, It's fine, while I cleaned up other people's messes. Because I made it look easy. I didn't think you needed it. Those 6 words rolled around in my head like marbles in a glass bowl, each one louder than the last. And then Mom, as if sensing the storm before it cracked, started crying in that fragile, wounded way she always did when confronted with a version of herself she didn't recognize. I didn't know you felt this way, she whispered. I thought you liked being the one who handled things. That's when Maddie, who had been sitting quietly, watching like a hawk, spoke up with a voice sharper than I'd ever heard from her before. She didn't like it, she said. She survived it. Those words landed like a punch. My mother flinched. My father blinked again. I nearly lost it right then and there. You know, I said, my voice tight like a rope pulled too far. There was a job offer. In Chicago. 6 years ago. I don't know if any of you even remember that. No one moved. It was everything I wanted. A promotion, a raise, a new start. And I turned it down because Mom had just gotten sick, and Jake couldn't handle anything, and someone needed to be here. Mom wiped her face, mascara smudged now, and shook her head like that would shake off the truth. I never asked you to do that, she said, and it was probably the most honest thing she'd said all night. You didn't have to, I replied. I knew if I left, everything would fall apart. And then I'd still be blamed for not being around when it happened. There was a silence after that, not awkward, not angry, just the heavy kind of stillness that falls over a battlefield after the shouting stops. The kind that tells you the fight might be over, but the wounds haven't started healing yet. I didn't think you needed it. My father's words echoed again in the back of my mind, and suddenly I was a little girl again, standing on the porch with skinned knees while Jake got a popsicle for not crying. You all thought I was strong, I said. And maybe I was. But being strong doesn't mean you don't need backup. It doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It just means I didn't show it. And then, just when I thought I'd said everything there was to say, Dad spoke again. Quiet, low, like he was talking to himself more than to me. You should have gone, he said. We'd have managed. I didn't know what to do with that sentence. Too late to fix anything. Too honest to ignore. And so I just stared at him, trying to decide if that was regret in his voice, or just the realization that the daughter he thought could carry it all might finally be done carrying any of it. The air in the house had changed by the end of the night, not in some dramatic, thunderstorm kind of way, but like the slow shift of seasons you barely notice until one day the leaves are gone and the cold settles into your bones. Everyone moved slower, talked softer, and walked on the kind of eggshells that weren't there when the evening began. The laughter had dried up completely, jokes abandoned in the corners of the room like forgotten napkins, and even Jake, who had tried once or twice to reignite some kind of normalcy, finally gave up. He made a half-hearted crack about how we should do this more often, and then immediately realized how stupid it sounded coming out of his mouth. No one responded. Marissa gave him a look that wasn't quite embarrassed, but definitely not supportive either, and he went quiet again, like a dog that just remembered the electric fence. Carol was in the kitchen pretending to wipe the same spot on the counter for the 4th time, probably hoping if she scrubbed hard enough she could erase her own part in all this. Doug stood by the back door with his hands in his pockets, watching the moon like it might offer him an easier conversation than the one waiting in the room. And Maddie, bless her observant little soul, was leaning against the fridge with a glass of water in her hand and a question in her eyes, one she hadn't asked yet, one she knew better than to ask while the dust was still settling. I had prepared the notes earlier that day, not because I expected the night to go this way exactly, but because somewhere deep down I knew I wouldn't keep quiet much longer. Each note was handwritten on plain white paper, not emotional, not angry, just the truth laid out the way a doctor lays out a diagnosis, firm, factual, without sugarcoating or unnecessary drama. I wasn't trying to start a war. I was ending one. A war I'd been conscripted into without my consent years ago. A war I didn't even realize I was fighting until my hands were raw and my back was bent. So, as they started gathering their coats and making those awkward, stalling movements people do when they don't want to admit the night is ending under a cloud, I went to my desk and picked up the stack. 5 envelopes. One for each of them. I handed them out like party favors, no smile, no explanation, just a small nod and a simple, "This is for you." Jake looked suspicious immediately, like I'd just handed him a subpoena. Marissa's eyebrows furrowed like she was trying to decide whether to open hers in the car or burn it in the fireplace. Mom took hers with trembling hands, and for a second I saw her lips start to move like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. Dad took his like he was accepting a piece of mail from a stranger, his eyes giving nothing away. Jake stared at his envelope and asked, "What is this exactly?" I looked at him, tired beyond tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your soul when you finally stop pretending everything's fine. "It's the part you missed," I said. "Or maybe the part you ignored. Either way, now you've got it in writing." He didn't open it. None of them did. Not right then, anyway. That would have required more honesty than any of them were ready for. They just shuffled out the front door, one by one, into the cool night air, leaving behind empty glasses and half-eaten snacks and the kind of quiet that echoes louder than shouting ever could. When the door finally closed behind the last of them, I let my shoulders drop in a way I hadn't let them fall in years. Maddie came and sat next to me, slipping her arm around mine like she used to do when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. She didn't say anything right away, just leaned her head against my shoulder, her breath warm, steady, real. After a minute, she asked the only question that mattered. "Do you feel better now?" I took a long breath, let it out slow. I didn't want to lie to her, didn't want to say yes just to tie a ribbon around the evening and pretend we'd found closure. "No," I said finally. "But I feel done." She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. The kind of done that isn't about quitting, but about surviving long enough to put the sword down. The kind of done that isn't peaceful, but necessary. We sat there a while longer in the silence, the house now still, heavy with truth, but also strangely lighter. And then, without thinking too much about it, I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the photos, found the one from last year's game night, all of us grinning like idiots, arms around each other, the picture-perfect lie we'd all agreed to tell. And I deleted it. No ceremony. No hesitation. Just one small gesture to mark the end of pretending. What was in the note I gave Jake? I don't think I'll ever say. Maybe it was a list of every favor he forgot, every dollar he never repaid, every time I watched him get praised for something I made possible. Or maybe it was just one sentence, the one that kept repeating in my head all night like a quiet drumbeat. "Just because you don't remember doesn't mean I forgot." The truth is, I don't know if I forgave them. I don't even know if I want to. Maybe this wasn't about revenge. Maybe it wasn't even about closure. Maybe it was just about finally speaking the part of the story that belonged to me. And if they read those notes and still don't care, then maybe that's the clearest answer I'll ever get. And maybe that's enough.